there's always something, right? There's a lot of unexpected, because even when you understand their workflow, there's always something that is beyond your control that you didn't think about, or you thought about it, but then it turned out differently. I know it's easier to say rather than you have to do, right? And I think when the rubber meets the road, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we had this plan, and then it turned out that was not what I learned from the other interview that I had. I've interviewed 20 different people, and then this is the workflow, and then put it somewhere like, well, we don't really care that much. And I think that is something that it requires a lot of talking and to people, but more so to listening and hearing what you don't want to hear. I think as a human, we like to hear what we want to hear. And it's always good to check with others within the team, whether is this what I hear correctly or not.
Welcome to the Message Engineer podcast for MedTech startups. We are so excited today to have Christine Winoto as our guest. Christine is the founder and executive director of the UCSF Rosenman Institute and founding partner of MedTech Venture Partners. Christine has decades of experience in healthcare across a range of sectors. And prior to joining UCSF, Christine worked at Kaiser Permanente in its capital and strategic planning capacity. She also worked at Genencor in a global role, as well as at medical device startups such as Physiometrics and Heartport, where we first met. Christine was named one of the most influential women in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2020. And she holds an MBA from Erasmus University in the Netherlands and a BS from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I always like to start with just kind of what I call define the word warm up. And so it's, just respond on what you think about this, what comes to mind for you as you think about medtech startups. An obvious first one, message or messaging.
Messaging, what I think about medtech messaging, I wish that people make it more fun.
We do tend to take ourselves too seriously, don't we, sometimes?
It feels that way, but I think it's good for a good reason too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and humor also makes the message, whatever it may be, more memorable, like cognitively proven, published studies, more memorable.
I learned that, I think, my background is based in science, and we tend to think that in order to influence people, we need to show data. Well, I learned later in life that how wrong I was. And actually it's about the story, not so much about the data. That is heartbreaking for me when I first learned about it.
Yeah, people want to feel something, right? Have some kind of emotion, laughter, cry, humor,
Yeah, but I think also backfire. I think I've been in a room where some people tend to be more cynical about people's story, but majority people usually like a good story.
I'll ask you the next. So how do you define or think about kind of origin story? And what are some of when you see all these startups coming through the Rosenman Institute or on the venture capital side, what do you see that they're doing really well? What do you see that they could do better, or they're kind of missing the mark on oftentimes?
I think it's where we are, we see so many ranges. We see individuals who just have an idea and they want to explore the idea and think about how it can make it into reality. and all the way to a company who has gone through the iteration that they have successfully raised some friends and family funding, and some even, more seasoned angel investors, and then some later on when we've known them for a few years, where they successfully raised Series A and Series B funding. And so in a way, what each of different stage have different struggle and challenges. And I think when you're in the seed funding, your challenges is different from when you're in the Series A funding versus somebody who just have an idea. And I think sometimes what I learned in life, we always think wherever we are, it seems more difficult than where it was. And we tend to forget so quickly how hard it was when we were, in the previous stage, and thinking that the current stage we have is tougher. And so to answer your question, what are the common pitfalls? I don't know. I think everybody is so personal in a way, depending on what their experience, depending on what they have known or they know about startup worlds versus somebody who don't know startup worlds. So it varies, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's very varied.
I know. I think sometimes it's hard for when you scale, it's so easy to scale when you don't have to customize. And I think a lot of the time, what we try to do where we are, we try to meet people where they are. And I think as a result of that, we oftentimes, our resources is also thin. Our team is really small, and we want to provide a lot of relevant advice. So what we do is we rely on a lot of our network of volunteer and expert in the industry, and try to match them and then meet them where they are. I think sometimes people on the outside world did not realize how much thinking behind the scene that we do for each individual, as we see the entrepreneur more on the individual level. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, that does make sense, and I think that's great that you are customizing what they need. Right, you're recognizing what they need and then trying to plug them into the right solution for that with volunteers. I mean,
but again, doesn't mean what you think that's what they need is what they think they need. Right, that's another thing. So I think you align the expectation. And again, I think that's something that maybe I can also learn on how to message it.
Yeah, that you bring up a really important point about startups, right? We both sit in observer positions, right? Me as a consultant with my company, and you at the Rosenman Institute. And we see a lot of startups, right? And it's easier for us to see because we're not, I think, because we're standing outside of it. So I think someone looking at my business standing outside of it would see things I wouldn't see. It's this kind of perspective.
Yes, but I think at the same time, sometimes it's easy for us to judge because sometimes you give advice, and because you probably hear from somebody, so-and-so said, this company did this, and then they make the mistake. But everybody is, like I said, everybody's special. Everybody's more special than others. And I think also that sometimes when, people, for example, like people can give me advice, we like to listen because I think we can learn so much from others. And I think sometimes people don't realize we also tried that particular advice. Maybe it did not work. And so there's, I think sometimes at the end of the day, as a CEO, you have to decide which advice that you have to follow through, because there's so many advice out there. And what is good, what is bad? People say, oh, don't take it from bad advice. And you, as a CEO, need to have that knowledge to decipher which one is something that fits with your personality, with your current state and your technology, your product, and the current environment that maybe was different when it doesn't mean that was bad advice, but that was the advice that maybe is no longer relevant or is still relevant. That's what makes an organization unique, because each person brings their unique perspective.
Yes, that's definitely true, right? Different people are going to create different companies to do different things. And, culturally, some things will work for people and other things won't work for other people. Yeah, ultimately, the CEO has to decide that. There's no doubt about that. So, from the standpoint then of offering advice to startups, and they're getting started, right, in MedTech specifically, there's a lot that has been changing. And I know from my perspective, I see a lot of, a ton of software, whole like software data piece coming into even proper kind of medical device companies, becoming a critical part of kind of the future growth. And then we have this whole new set of folks, newish, right? Kind of in the digital health and health tech, and coming from kind of more of a direct to patient perspective, remote patient monitoring and things like that. As you look to people who are coming up in this industry, what are some of the things that you think are going to be really critical areas of knowledge for those folks as they are building startups that, say, 10 years ago really wasn't that important?
I think the basics always the same, isn't it? I felt that you need to know the whole process in terms of the flow of where the money will come from. I think healthcare in this country is so unique compared to other healthcare in the rest of the world, which is still crazy when you think about it. And I think I love to think that, the doctor always blame the payer, the payers always blame the patients, there's always shifting the blame. And I was telling a lot of the entrepreneurs is that, it has to work in order to, it has to make a difference on the outcome for the patient or the consumer. But at the same time, the consumer in this country don't make any decision about healthcare. And that is a sad reality. But that's the reality. And, one time I always laugh about that even a patient willing to pay for Botox and plastic surgery, but to treat their cancer, they don't think they should pay for it. But that's the US market. And so what are the things that they need to learn more? And I think there's a lot more cross-functional in terms of technical knowledge. Maybe in the old days, if you are doing something that is mechanical, then maybe you just need to work with certain group of expertise. But I think nowadays, a lot of the new innovation requires more cross-functional. Somebody who maybe understand the neuroscience, somebody needs to understand the engineering side, somebody needs to do the computer science. And I think that probably was less so when I think about when I just started my career in medical devices world, I think. Mm-hmm. And so now it's more, how do you knowing how to bring different verticals, different knowledge into one room and understanding everybody's perspective. I think that is something that maybe you need to have. Maybe before that you didn't need to have. Maybe before you just think about an engineering, an R&D guy, and a marketing guy, and a sales team, and regulatory, you're good. But I feel even now, just on the product side, you need to have more technical background, I guess.
Yeah, I think with that definitely makes sense. I went to the MedTech conference. It's the AdvaMed's annual meeting a couple of months ago. And I think one of the things that was really fascinating was that all the major, the large medical device companies were talking about software and data in big, meaningful ways. Also talking about workflow. There's this long held idea of like what you talked about, right? Driving clinical outcomes and making sure, as you said earlier, that the economics work. So a critical thing and that sometimes I've found folks new to med device don't really understand that and how complicated that is and how to set it up to kind of win, right? It's got to win for the patient, it's got to win for the providers, it needs to win economically for whatever facility, wherever that may be, that is this thing is being done, whether it's the home or an ASC or a hospital, right? Or someplace else entirely. The one new piece of that, in addition to clinical outcomes and kind of the economics, was this third piece of workflow. The companies were talking about and saying how critical this was. And they didn't say, saving time, but part of it does boil down to making it easier, which means saving time, making it simpler, et cetera, because of all the kind of labor considerations, burnout, and just slots not being filled on the physician side and nurses side. And I'm wondering, do you see that startups are thinking about that or building for that or understand when they're developing their medical device that we're headed into a new future?
I think, I feel that sometimes, I always joke that I think majority of startups know that they need to think about all those things that you mentioned, right? They're getting the economic right, the workflows right. It's easier to tell, like, oh, you need to figure out the workflow, but there's so many nuances and details. And I think sometimes what makes entrepreneurs is that sometimes they jump before they know everything, right? If you wait until you know everything, you don't go. So I think they do think about it. And I think what I also found people, it's hard to get that information as well, right? So it's all about gathering information, listening to the constituents that you're supporting, asking the right question, and that can be challenging. And sometimes, so if you think about the workflow, there's, depending on where your product is used, different setting has different workflow, and to understand which market that you're going to understand it first, and then if you follow that particular segment, is that something that's translatable to others? And I found sometimes it's almost like I always joke, at least in my internal meeting, it's like life is all about solving problem until the day you die. And I think the same thing with startup. If you're able to solve the problem before you run out of money, then it gives you the chance. And I think that's a lot, because there's always something, right? There's a lot of unexpected, because even when you understand their workflow, there's always something that is beyond your control that you didn't think about, or you thought about it, but then it turned out differently. And so I think I know it's easier to say rather than you have to do, right? And I think when the rubber meets the road, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we had this plan, and then it turned out that was not what I learned from the other interview that I had. I've interviewed 20 different people, and then this is the workflow, and then put it somewhere we don't really care that much. And I think that is something that it requires a lot of talking and to people, but more so to listening and hearing what you don't want to hear. I think as a human, we like to hear what we want to hear. And it's always good to check with others within the team, whether is this what I hear correctly or not, I think. And I was talking about the whole workflow too. It's very complicated, because going in, oftentimes when I come up with a solution that this is going to make a huge change, but people underestimate the willingness of people to learn when you're so busy. And I think what I learned in life, everybody can learn, is more about whether they're willing or not. So any technology that you want to implement that make a huge better outcome for the patient, if different part are not willing to do the time, to put the effort, is not going anywhere. It's all about how can you convince people to be willing to support you on different side of different aspect of the sales cycle or be it investors. And I think that's what it is. And sometimes you look at some technology, is it really better than the other? Or is it because they were surrounded by the right people who are willing to implement that? And so that's why I think going back to your messaging is about how do you bring those people together? And sometimes it's based on how you convince people. Some people really knows how to twist your arm and then like, oh my God, this is what I want to do for XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, somebody who can be a really great idea and is like, you know what, I'm not interested. So at the end, I always say the world will be so much easier if we are all robots because everything will be so effective. But we are not. We are a very complicated human being. We make irrational decisions and based on a lot of irrational things.
Yeah, you make a really great point, right? Because I always say we're the sum of our experiences. And the more we learn, right, we're not only just the sum of our own experiences, but epigenetically perhaps that of our ancestors, right, our predecessors. We may think we're being objective, but yeah, if we look it through our lens, right, and our lens is limited.
There's no subject when it involves with if there's no standardized multiple tests, then everything else is subjective.
There you go. Yeah, no need to like drum up an SAT for med device company. I'll pass on that. I think one of the things you're talking a bit about was this, listening, right, and learning, listening to different viewpoints and then figuring out kind of how to sort that. I know, for example, for me, it was always really helpful when I was in product management. I would try to do any kind of physician meetings or focus groups at that point in time with an R&D colleague, because we would literally sit in the same meeting and walk away with different takeaways, different impressions, which was good, right? So I'm wondering if you've seen kind of best practices for listening that startups can do, or things you don't have to name any people or groups, but some things I think some of the ones that are doing better are doing, and some of the things you may or may not want to avoid, if any.
That's, oftentimes, because I'm not one of their customers, so it's not something that they ask me for workflow or anything like that. But I can draw from my own experience. I think, again, like, I think having a good habit of recapping the meeting, it always, I think the moment you put it in paper, it become clearer somehow in terms of what you're understanding and what that person said, and the other person can be like, yep, that's what I said, and then, or, well, no, that's not what I said. And I think sometimes that person, I think when somebody say, oh, Christine, you're awesome, that's all I remember. Like, Christine, you're awesome. But after he said, Christine, you're awesome, there's something else that maybe I didn't catch it because I was so fixated with the awesomeness part. And I think,
sure you hear that.
But I think, I don't know, I was raised completely different. I was raised not focusing on the compliment. I tend to focus on the hard stuff, like the part that is not working. So oftentimes when I said, I focus on the awesomeness, actually, I usually don't hear it when somebody said I am doing a good job, because I tend to minimize that. But that is a different culture. I think I learned that in this country, which is great. The positive energy is so important. But that's something that I also am learning, that people like to hear positive things. Like for me, I like to hear the negative things because that's something I can do to change it.
It's interesting. I love feedback, right? And it feels good for a minute, the positive feedback. I've always valued more highly the folks who could walk in like when I was inside corporate, literally like walk down the hall, open my door, come in, close the door behind them and say, we have a problem. Like this, that, the other thing. And I valued, I think like you do, I valued those people because they told it to me straight. And when someone told me what was happening, I could do, like you said, I could do something about it. I could take action. I could fix it. We could problem solve together. I mean, do you think that that's a critical skill in startups that people are able to have these kind of forthright conversations with each other?
I think, it's easy to judge again. Everybody's different. I think everybody comes from different experience and background, especially if you work on something that you think about it day and night, and then you come to me asking for feedback and I give you a feedback when I literally just thought about it, 5 minutes before you asked me that question. And so maybe my feedback might not be completely valid, but this is why I always tell my son, I have a 16 years old, but I remember when he was maybe 11 or so, teenagers don't like to get criticism or critical feedback. Mm-hmm. And I learned there's a different, we need to learn how to take feedback. Mm-hmm. And this is one exercise that I did, and some people might think I'm crazy as a mom, but I was very frustrated because I felt like I was doing very nice thing, and of course, maybe when I speak to him, it's so different when I speak to you. So maybe my feedback a bit less filtered, so it seems a bit hard on him. But I think at the end, I realized that this is not helpful. But we had this exercise, and he and I, we both practiced it, and I learned it from, I don't remember now which article, which book that I read, is that you ask for permission if you want to give somebody feedback. I mean, if you're a startup, you ask for feedback. But then what I did to my son is like, can I give you a feedback? Because as a parent, you need to give feedback all the time. Mm-hmm. And then his answers always, for like a whole year, we practice is that, yes, please. Thank you. Tell me more. And I think I've seen a lot of people, when they ask for feedback, they tend to defend their position and not, I'm not saying that they're wrong. Could be they're right. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell people when I provide feedback, this is based on what my impression for a short interaction that I have with that person. And this is the impression I have. So I could be wrong, but this is what my impression is. I think oftentimes when you tell somebody like, oh, but I did this, and then you never got the whole feedback from that person. And so I always tell my son, when somebody gives you feedback, they took the risk. They don't have to give you feedback. It's that, as long as that person not going to say something really mean, attacking your personality. And, I think you as the recipient decide which feedback you want to take. But this is definitely, I learned it from Dan Rosenman, is that, hey, those are information and you decide whether you want to take it or not. But if you tell somebody like, oh, this is not how you do it, this is what you said is wrong, Mm-hmm. And then, why do I need to come up with more feedback? Because then the whole hour is just listening. Instead of me giving feedback, the whole hour will be me listening to the other person defending what their position is. So then it becomes, the purpose of the meeting become different. And so my team, and, I've been always telling my team, like, this is a safe place. You guys can give me feedback. I mean, listening to negative feedback, no matter how how amazing you are, it always sucks. It's like, this is not something that I want to hear. But at the same time, you have to suck it up. Mm-hmm. It's something that you have to listen and make the other person feel that it is a valuable feedback, and then you decide what you want to do with it. Nobody can tell you what to do with that feedback. Mm-hmm. But if you set it down, you never hear the whole story.
Yeah, That's really brilliant. I think that accepting feedback, that idea of constantly learning that you talked about, being open and receptive to feedback, really hearing it. It's critical to your growth, right? And getting better, doing better, learning. And even if it's something you walk away from and you say, I'm not going to take all of that. There's always something in there to learn.
Yeah, because you never know. I mean, if you give me the feedback and I said, Maureen, that was horrible, whatever that you just said to me. And then the next time, maybe that moment, it was horrible. But the next moment, what your feedback might be amazing, but you would never tell me. Because I already told you it was horrible.
That being asking for and being open and receptive to feedback, not defending yourself, having enough kind of grounding of who you are and where you are to really listen, really hear. I think sometimes people listen, I'm speaking from my own experience as well. There are times where I used to listen, but not really hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And where I'd be like, yeah, I don't believe that. That's not right. But I think one of the critical things that you're talking about is this idea of when you I'd say qualify things by saying, well, my impression is, right? Because there really is no, even in science, right? There's no right or wrong. It changes. It used to be right. If it was right 50 years ago, maybe it's not right now, right? Is Pluto a planet? Is Pluto not a planet? So I think if
what is it now? Is it not? Is it a planet again? I think it's a planet again. No?
I don't remember. It does not affect my daily life or my future at the moment. So Pluto can just be its very own self, whatever it wants to be. But I think if science can shift and change, right? We know, right? The world is flat. The world's not flat, right? It's changed a lot, and even in year to year, like
the bullet has been proven not flat though.
This is true.
I don't think that's changing.
Yeah, that's not quite. There's no question marks there anymore. But hey, the species is extinct. Oh, hey, we went to this faraway island and went into the forest and not extinct, right? So they're discovering new species like every week. And so I think to think that any one of us, that's why I love what you said about, well, it's my impression that, because the older I get, the more I realize that there is no right or wrong, right? There's a lot of gray and a lot of different people perceiving things in different ways. And there's so much to learn from other people. If we're, like you said, if we're open to feedback, we're not like, okay, I'm ready for the feedback. I built the giant wall around me. I feel safe now. I'll sit here and nod my head and let the words blow by me. So not the way to take feedback. And yeah, I would think, and I haven't thought about this before, so I'm curious what you think about if it's almost more important to take feedback in startups than it would be at a larger company, just because it's changing so rapidly.
I think it's something that, as a human, you constantly have to look for feedback. Be it of course, baby, you cannot take feedback. You're going to ask for feedback. But even somebody who is very, successful, if you think of somebody's success is XYZ and that person there's always something. There's, that you can always improve. And so it doesn't matter whether you're a startup or we all have our own blind spot, and that's how we survive sometimes, but it's also make us not perfect. And nobody is perfect until the day you die. Right. And that's what I would say, that nobody is perfect. The time that you're perfect is when you're dead.
Perfectly dead.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No more feedback happening then.
Yeah. I think that's the reality of life. Mm-hmm. But doesn't mean that's a bad thing either. because you can, learning is, you're discovering about yourself and you're discovering about what's surrounding you. And I think that might make life so interesting and fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I've heard people say things like, when you stop learning, you die, right? Learning new things, trying new things, is I'll just lay down and call it a day.
Yeah.
Done with things. So yeah, I agree. I think one of the other things I want to roll back to that you mentioned a few times was you kept talking about doing, right? And I'm not going to get this quote right, but it was something about don't. It's something like, if you're not doing the thing, don't interrupt the person trying. I know that
Mm-hmm.
it's stated more eloquently than that, but that's kind of how I remember it. And so I really like when you're talking before about, it depends, and, there's so much doing. And what's that? I know there's no perfect answer to this either, but so maybe the way to ask it is, what are some of your thoughts around, you go into a company, you have this idea of, hey, I have this idea, I'm going to start a startup, right? Some family and friends money. And I have this kind of vision for where it could be, but we need to back it up to present day, and like, how do we start and where do we start? And on this idea of really focusing on doing, right, and learning. So what are your thoughts around this balance of kind of doing versus kind of thinking and researching, kind of for med tech startups, med device
Yeah.
startups?
This is what I think. I always said, like, I felt maybe in life in general, but I think in the startup world, I feel that there's always, you're striving always, you have to think short term, but you also have to think long term. You have to be patient, yet you have to be impatient. It's like, there's no such thing in balance, right? And somebody was telling me there's all about priority. You just have to move between one extreme to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think healthcare is another thing. Sometimes, the process of understanding the market can be really long. Mm-hmm. That if you want to learn it to perfection, like you learned as much as you can, and you think it's never enough because you never know enough, because it's so complicated. And then if that's the case and you're paralyzed, then you never start something. And then sometimes when you do something, but then you have not really understand the market, and you feel like you want to come up with, say, a beautiful engineering prototyping, because it feels like you're doing something, you can see the result, and that can be rewarding because you feel like you're doing. And that also can be not so wise. And I think oftentimes, at least I do, is that this is how I know what I need to do. And then you feel like, and it's something that you're comfortable with, then you tend to do it first. And then maybe things that you're not comfortable with, which is, talking with people in the marketplace or an investor world, because you feel like, well, I don't have any product, I'm not going to talk to investors. And so, it's just, again, the heart is the chicken and egg. And I think sometimes it's easy to say, like, oh yeah, you should talk to an investor, but then investor always like, well, why do I want to waste my time talking to somebody when you don't have anything yet? But human are human. And I think sometimes it helps to have a personality. I believe that if you're likable, somehow you can convince somebody to tell you more. And I think the world is a bit unfair sometimes when I think about it. Is that we all have different personality, and some personality are more rewarded than other personality. Yet in real life, when you think about it, different personality have different role to play. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer because, again, it's straddling, you know, you have to do it. It's almost like you have to do it all, like moving a lot. It's almost like you are like an octopus. You cannot just focus on one and then you'd be like catapult to the ether. But you almost have to move things around so that you kind of have so many things that you need to figure it out and then somehow move elegantly.
I mean, I think that's what you describe is the very nature of a startup, right? You're trying to understand the regulatory regardless of the people in the roles at the company. You're trying to understand the regulatory landscape in the US and outside. Like, where are we going to start? You're trying to understand clinicals. What do we really need to punch into the marketplace? And where do we start? Right? And balancing that with the regulatory, and then balancing that with what we know about the markets and the customers and the reimbursement, right? It's you'll appreciate that, right? It's a bit like baking. You get too much of one thing and not enough of the other thing. It's not gonna taste great at the outset, and probably won't look too appealing either. And I think that I heard someone talk the other day about two people actually talk over the last 2 weeks talk about the idea of it's not about seeking balance. It's about, like you said, prioritizing being unbalanced, recognizing that there is no perfect balance, whether it's in a company or between your personal and your work life. But understanding what your priorities are, as you said, knowing that you're focused on the priorities, like things that are really going to move the needle. And I think that when you talked about that, that made me think about. Think about what I've heard over the last couple of weeks, and also about this idea of writing down where you're spending your time. Because it's very simple, and 1,000 people have talked about this, right? But do it for a week, let's say, and then look at it and say, is this how I spend my time indicates, what's going to get done at work, right? Or what the priorities are at work. Does that line up? And if it doesn't line up, how can you make it line up?
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy, like you said, like if you're really into prototyping, right? Maybe you're like, oh, I'm going to prototype this. Maybe that wasn't the right next move, kind of in the chess game of a MedTech startup. But it was the fun thing or the easy thing, or we've all had those days where, oh, I'm going to not do the thing I really need to get done today. And instead, I'm going to do the following short list of busy items.
Right.
And so I think
like you finished it.
Yeah, right. So I think that you bring up great ideas about doing, prioritizing, understanding that there's no perfection and balance, and really listening to feedback. I think that's critical from customers, from whomever the customer ecosystem is composed of.
And I think, it's always, somebody was telling me that keep talking so that people can hear your problem. And then that way people can give you feedback. And then they can try to help you. And you'd be surprised how much people are willing to help if you let them know. But again, you probably have to be nice, like person.
Right. I think that's a great point, that people, most people, again, let's not assume, like you said, that most people want to help other people, right, and help problem solve. But it's interesting. It makes me think about transparency a little bit. Sometimes you want to be like, hey, I have my XYZ company and it's perfect. We do this, we do that. We're perfect. Or, you're pitching essentially. There's, as you said, there's a lot of really critical feedback critical to the success of, you, the team, the company. And people will help you problem solve, but you need to be forthright, right, and transparent about, hey, I'm kind of struggling with this. Hey, I've kind of hit a roadblock with that. can you help give me feedback? And I think that takes in my experience, I think that takes someone who's very grounded and kind of humble about kind of, approaching the world like a beginner. I've the yoga teacher stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like the beginner's mind, right? The idea of the beginner's mind.
I think also when getting, asking for feedback, asking for help, I think, I'm not saying that you just go out to anybody out there. I think you need find somebody that you have built a trusting relationship, then, then you can be more open. And I think, you've seen a lot of companies like they have to show certain how, how they don't have, and everything is perfect. And then they don't want to show it to their potential acquirer. But then at the end, it doesn't mean that they should hide it. But I'm just saying you don't have to go out there, say like, hey, the sky is falling. And then everybody is like, well, I'm not going to buy you. But I think, hopefully you fix that problem before you got your acquirer. But I think having somebody who has earned your trust, and that way you can always go to that person whenever there's challenges that you face. And I think, like in life, I think company is the same way as, go through life. You want to surround yourself with trusted people who can tell you that you suck sometimes. And hopefully you have a partner who can tell you that when they say something that you suck doesn't mean it's a bad intention. It's because it's a good intention.
Right. Yeah, they're trying to help with as you mentioned before, like those we all have blind spots, right? So to try to help with our blind spots and help us identify areas where we can grow, right?
Yeah.
And we can do better. It's not always the easiest thing to hear.
No, not easy. I think even delivering the message that you suck has to be very thoughtful, right? And so I always tell my son is my guinea pig, and I told him
I understand that.
It's easy. It's whenever I give you a feedback, I have thought it 10 different ways on how to deliver it, and it's still going to sound sucks because the message is sucks that you're not amazing. So you have to be able to filter that out and try to get rid of your ego and then figure it out. And I think I learned this quote I thought was really amazing, is that we have ego to protect ourselves when we were young, but it's the same thing. It's like a chicken. And somebody said it, I thought it was like so beautifully said, is that when you're a chicken in the egg is your ego. And then at some point, you have to break that ego in order for you to become chicken. If you never break your ego, you never become chicken. Or you never break the eggs, and you never become the person that you need to be. And I think that is something that comes with age, maybe.
That definitely helps a little bit, at least in my own experience. Yeah, I think what you're doing with your son and helping him understand the enormous value of feedback and really hearing it. I think that's critical, right? For our families, for people we love, for businesses. Providing critical feedback is how we all grow, right? We all grow and do more and get better.
Yeah, I'm not really good at giving feedback because it's, not everybody like to hear feedback. And I don't like conflict.
Right? We all have areas for growth, right? And it's interesting you say I don't like conflict. I've found that, and listening to other people that they say like move towards the discomfort or move towards the fear, because that's usually a way of life signaling areas of potential growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I can speak to that from my own experience because that's true. Like if I'm starting to feel super uncomfortable about something, it's usually because I'm learning something and I'm about to break the egg on that particular one, in a particular area. But it always gets more uncomfortable before it. Like you said you were at the beginning, you were talking about you're in the next stage of the company and it feels difficult and challenging, but you've forgotten that X many months or a year or so ago, that when you're in that stage, it was also difficult, and uncomfortable, and challenging, right? But you're like, now you've overcome that, you've learned that, so now that's super easy.
Not so hard anymore.
Right, not so hard anymore. But this new stage, right, lots of learning, is uncomfortable and is hard, but valuable, I think, at the end.
Yeah.
Push through. So a lot of great MedTech startups out there. I love that I came into this thinking we were going to talk about like funding and best practices, and that you were really speaking to this idea of people. I wouldn't say relationships necessarily, but it revolves in that area, right? Feedback and focus and doing, which is super critical. And that unbalance, right, of doing versus thinking, or doing versus researching and thinking, right? There has to be some doing and there has to be some researching and thinking, but not all of one or all of the other. So,
yeah.
Somewhere middle-ish from that standpoint.
Yes.
So that you're doing the right thing, you're not wasting your time, but you're also doing to learn to take it out of theory and into reality, right? And to say, hey.
Yeah. Well, like what you're saying is this writing it down, right? I think when you're writing down, they don't lie to you. Your perception and what reality can be checked.
Writing is, I know writing's super powerful. My brother is a cognitive psychology professor. It's actually psychophysics. It's like a branch of a branch of a branch. But he talks about
psychophysics. I never heard about that.
It's super cool. Like it didn't have a name when he started in this. It's our perception, so that human or dogs or whomever, right? It's how we perceive the movement of objects through space. So like, how does an outfielder catch a fly ball? Like the theory previously to my brother's was that they're calculating like the parabola in their head to line up in the right place. It's not the way it works. Like a follow-up study on how dogs catch frisbees, and it's similar. But we use visual and perceptual cues, right? Because what we perceive is happening is not what is actually happening. Right?
I can tell you when I catch a ball, I do not think about parabola. I'm just like, oh, it's coming.
Right? Exactly. 1,000%. 1,000%. And so he talks about this, where they talk about kind of brainwashing and how it used to take place during wars with writing. And they would have them write because it helps you believe when you write. And so it was like, the United States isn't perfect. I'm going to get this completely wrong, but my brother will correct it. But something like you have them write, the United States isn't perfect. And then the United States, over and over again. And then the next week, the United States has problems over and over again. And then the next week, right? You kind of take it. And so they're buying it by writing. They start to cognitively write. That is what is true. And so I think that, one, it's a really powerful thing kind of cognitively for us to write things. And I also, we know in MedTech in particular that, as one of my colleagues used to say, it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
write it down. And I think another critically important piece that you brought up about writing it down is it allows then for alignment of different people, right? You can say, oh, it's not what I said, or maybe if that's what I said, that wasn't what I meant. Can I tweak that? And so it allows for this very kind of non-threatening, amiable way to say, hey, let me correct that. This isn't what I really meant. This is what I meant. Or can you tweak this? Or can you tweak that? And allows people to kind of align and then move to the next step together. So
it takes time writing, but I think it's so valuable. I wish I know how to write when I was younger. This is something that I did not. I learned later in life.
Yeah, I think writing is interesting in this day and age. So I think when you think about, I came up with very formal writing and memos and very formal writing and very formal dress, and we know it shifted a lot in great and amazing ways. And I think that what happens nowadays is what I see a lot of from the marketing side, because I'm look at the world through that lens, is people aren't intaking or as comfortable reading and writing kind of long form text. So much so that if I put more than 2 paragraphs in an email, it just you have to bullet point, bold, italic, I have to really think about what message, if it's something going to multiple people and I really want to be clear, I really need to think about how they're going to intake that message and how to make that really easy for them to think about. Because it's all become very short, right? It's all catchphrases and a couple short things. And it used to be you'd start with an opening paragraph and then you'd build and then you'd close, right? Now it has to be the hook up front or people are just going to scroll right on by you.
We all have ADHD.
Right? So I think even that kind of what used to be kind of long form writing is it's being challenged. Let's put it that way.
They know people just I just want to know the end. Was it happy ending?
Right. And 1,000%. Tell me the cool stuff. I don't need all that blather in the middle. Get me to the end point. Right. I mean, there's a reason why YouTube chops things up into key bits, even if you don't ask them to. So you can jump ahead.
Yeah.
You Google search and it's I'm going to take you to minute, 3, 10 seconds in to answer your question. You don't need to watch the 20-minute video.
Right. So. And you can listen to it in 2x also.
I'm sure people listen to this podcast in 1.5 to 2x because I do that with videos as well. I'm move it along, people.
But some are harder, and there's a lot of content. Then you gotta wait. I missed it, so you have to go back. But I think we are always in a rush. There's a lot of competing things that you want to do. You want to watch TV, you want to do X, Y, Z, and so you want to do everything all at once. And then we forgot that being present is so important. And sometimes we forgot.
I think that is, being present. That's a great insight, right? That when you're talking to someone, right? You're talking to someone giving feedback or listening, really, really working on being present and in that moment and really hearing it, or really kind of listening to what they're not saying non-verbally, to try to deliver it in a way that they can hear, right? It's like the spoonful of sugar medicine to go down. And some people like it more, like it more direct. I prefer someone
Yeah.
who's just like, hey, this is an issue. But I have found going the other direction that most people don't prefer that.
They don't prefer the directness.
Right. So
I think it's a cultural thing. It's very cultural where, depending on what culture you're from. I mean, so I think that some cultures are more direct than others. And also English is also a language that's pretty direct, I have to say.
It's interesting. How so?
And I speak multiple languages, and I think English is I don't know compared to other language, but I feel like, compared to the languages that I speak, I think English is very precise and specific so that there's no back and forth. So actually, I notice I grew up in Indonesia when there's no genders, there's no past tense, there's no tenses. And I remember when I interacted with Dean, I would say something, because like in Indonesian, it's like, I eat yesterday, I eat tomorrow, I eat now. In English, it's not like, I ate. You don't even have to assume, it already happened, right? So, if sometimes when I'm tired and I'm sleepy, my tenses become completely out of whack. Less so in writing, but when I speak, it's harder. Then people can be really impatient. Like, what does he mean? Did you mean like that person just ate yesterday, or that person is eating now? So it's really annoy that person because they're in a hurry. They want to understand what you are saying, and then you confuse them because you're not very clear. But growing up in Indonesia, the culture is so different. It's like, oh, Maureen eat. I was like, oh, and then you would say, oh, when Maureen eat? Was it yesterday, or was it tomorrow, or was it today? And then say, oh, it was yesterday. So there's a lot of people willing to spend more time with back and forth. And even now I notice when I speak to my family or my friends in Indonesia, I lost patience because I have changed. And so I think in Indonesia, we value the back and forth. That's when you build that relationship. Here is inefficient. So I think oftentimes a lot of it is, cultural. Language is such a cultural thing. And I think when I think about presenting and doing pitching, and I always felt that, we are in the United States. I'm not saying that if you're an immigrant, you cannot be successful. There's a lot of successful immigrants, but I think you need to be really good in communicating your ideas in a succinct way, in a meaningful way, and it get people attention quickly because people are short on time.
That is right. It's not this kind of expected, like you're talking about, kind of right? The dialogue is expected, right? You're going to go back and forth to share the conversation and understand each other. And that idea of being succinct and meaningful and kind of getting to the point is limited time when pitching.
Yeah. And people are busier and busier because technology allows us to take on more. I mean, before you send a letter to apply for a job, you wait for 2 weeks for somebody to show up. And now, like, 2 weeks? What's going on? Did I not get it? Did that person not like my interview?
There's this expectation of immediacy. I've realized the more emails I send, the more replies I get, right? Shocking. And so
that is a good thing. Your more email that you send, sometimes it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, fair point. That's a good point. Yeah, if you're like job hunting, for example. What I've started doing if I am playing catch up on the weekend due to certain activities or business during the week, I make a point to schedule them not send them right away, but make a point to schedule them for Monday morning, because I, one, don't want people to expect me to be working on the weekend. I also don't want them to think that they have to respond to me on the weekend. I mean, unless we're in some kind of emergency situation, and then we're all in it together and we know and understand this. But on as a regular flow of things, and then, then when it goes out on Monday, I mean, that's not very efficient, but I want to be able to respond to them when I'm, in full on work mode.
Yeah.
And I can't catch up. I've tried doing it the other way. I can't catch up because people start responding right away. And then I need to right? The cycle starts.
Yeah.
I'm not catching up on the weekend. I'm creating more work for myself. That's not efficient. For me, at least. So
it's hard to be completely efficient.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're like you said before, we're imperfectly human. So
yeah.
We're not meant to be machinery.
Right.
And Gary, even those aren't, right? Those aren't perfectly efficient either, right? There's always friction of some way, shape, or form involved.
Yeah.
So, which is to be expected. So I'll close with just a couple kind of fun questions. And I think this is an easy one for you.
Okay.
If you could travel anywhere in the world right now, where would you go and why?
Wow. That is a hard question, because what I want is a lot more than the time that and the resources that I have. And it has so many different reasons. I like to go to Japan because I always enjoy Japan. It's really fun. Food is great. Travel is easy. But at the same time, if I keep going back to the places that I like, then I never got to explore new places. And so one of the things that the second one, if I can sneak in another one, I'd like to go travel in Indonesia a little bit. That's always, the idea always sounds good when I want to go to Indonesia. It's like, because you have all your memory and you're nostalgic about, places. But of course, when you left a place many, many years ago, what you remember, what has changed sometimes doesn't always line up. It always look great when you're on YouTube channel because, you don't feel the heat, you don't feel like the mosquitoes, all looks so perfect from your perfect temperature in your house. So those are the two places that I want to go first.
Japan and Indonesia. All right.
Yeah.
You mentioned food. So my second question will be, if someone's feeling adventurous and it's their first time in Japan, Tokyo, or and such, what should they try that they wouldn't ordinarily try, and why?
In Japan?
Yeah.
Because I feel like Japanese food has gone global. Almost like you can find a lot of Japanese food.
Or Indonesian food.
In
Indonesia.
I never liked it, and I still don't like it, but I was appalled to see the cost of sea cucumber. And growing up, my mom would make us sea cucumber that I hated. But I didn't hate it. I tolerated it. And, it's not considered cheap either. It's like delicacy. And when I went to Japan a few years ago, I was so shocked the price that people pay for sea cucumber. So just for the sake of trying, you should try sea cucumber.
See if people dislike it as much as you do, or if they like it.
I think it has no taste. It's just the texture. And I think a lot of Asian food, we appreciate salt, sour, and sweet and spicy, but also texture. And I think Western food are less so about appreciating texture.
It's a great point.
It's that fifth element of the taste.
Ah, there you go. I like it. I like it. So, any parting thoughts, or you want to share a little bit about the Rosenman Institute before we close up for today?
Yeah, let's see. I think, it's the Rosenman Institute has taken me through a journey that I never expected. And it has given a lot of joy. And also at the same time, I hope it create impact for entrepreneurs who are interested in bringing their technology into commercialization in some small way. And one thing that we are doing and we've been doing is that we really are very passionate in helping the entrepreneurs to get to their next stage. And I always tell people oftentimes there's so much. One thing that we can tell you that we try our best. And I think also we cannot do it without them. And so it's almost like, we need to, I always tell people is that you get what you put in. So I think that's, one thing that we don't provide funding. So what we do is provide community. We try to provide a sense of connection and a fun and safe space to meet people and passionate people who want to bring their technology out there.
Very cool. That's awesome. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great catching up and talking about all sorts of things today with you that entrepreneurs need to think about. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for joining us today on The Message Engineer. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. I don't know which platform you're on if you like what you heard today. So thanks so much. Bye for now.